Good afternoon. I'd like to welcome everyone to this week's edition of Imperial as One's Belonging series, where we share the lived experiences of individuals from the Black, Asian, and minority ethnic communities, stories about their sense of identity and their sense of belonging. And I do say this every week because it's very true that we have a very special guest, and it is Maryane Mwaniki.
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 There you go. There's a story behind that. It means beekeeper in Swahili. So yeah.
Maryane is a very special person, as you can tell, right? She's a former head of alumni relations here at Imperial College. She's worked at several of the world's best institutions about business relationships, and she's also a life coach. And she's recently started her own business, but I'm going to let her expand. But I'm going to say, Maryane, thank you for being so patient with me. I'm going to ask you the first question, which I ask every week, which is, can you tell me a little bit about what it was when you were growing up, which gave you your sense of identity, your sense of belonging, and how that's influenced you now?
Yeah. I would say there's an importance in community. So I come from a Congolese background. So Congo is Central Africa, and also from Guinea, which is West Africa.
Mm-hmm.
And in those two cultures, community is everything.
Mm-hmm.
In community, you express who you are. In community, there's a mirror that's shone in front of you. You see yourself and you see others. In community, you are understood and you are seen. And so for me, that's where my belonging has really been cultivated. And especially growing up, as an immigrant child, came as a refugee, growing up in poverty, it was community that allowed me to know that I existed and I wasn't invisible. And so, yeah, I'd say that's a big part of who I am.
So that development of that community identity, how was community communicated to you? What was it that helped you to recognize this is important?
Yeah. Well, I think it was so in our household, we'd have family come over all the time, and big family members in terms of lots of big families coming over, small family members coming over, individual friends. And what was interesting in all those people's experiences, the week was tough, financial struggles. There was a community of people who were first generation here in the UK around the 90s. And so life financially wasn't great for them.
Right.
And there was always this cloud of uncertainty in terms of, would you be able to stay in this country? Would you be kicked out? But when we came together and we sat together in the living room and we were eating our food, speaking in our language, there was that real sense of, aha, I see Auntie so-and-so. Uncle so-and-so does have a laugh and he does smile. And it was that sense of familiarity and that sense of, you belong here now. In this place, you don't need to worry. In this place, we see you and we get you. And I could see that as a child in just the way body languages would change. I could see that in the way laughter would become amplified just in the coming together. And I guess that became ingrained in me very early on.
So it was the coming together, as you said earlier on, it was the coming together which helped you to say, community is important. We are important.
Yeah, we exist.
And we're happy that we're here.
Exactly.
Yeah. So you said you came over as a refugee, and so many of your early childhood memories will be going to school in this country. Where did you preside, and what was it like in your early childhood growing up in the UK?
Yeah. So I've always been in East London. So grew up first in Leytonstone, then moved to Leyton, and then ended up in Walthamstow, where I live now. And I've been there for decades.
Mm-hmm.
And East London's really interesting. East London for me anyway, because I guess I was more on the northeast side, was actually multicultural, like truly multicultural. Not, multicultural in terms of there's a huge cluster of a race that's not white. No, it was a real mixture. And so that was beautiful for me growing up because I really felt a sense of belonging in the differences that we had in our cultures, but also a sense of belonging in that actually there's something unique about what I bring to the table as a Congolese and Guinean woman who is British and who's here. And so I really enjoyed that. In my classroom, I had people from Kazakhstan, I had people from Spain, people from Turkey, people from Mali, and it was just a whole mixture. And I felt so settled. And I love those early childhood experiences in that sense. It wasn't always like that. There was lots of racism in the backdrop, but within the school environment, I really felt a sense of belonging in my difference, because everyone was different and it was okay.
And did you know how earlier on you spoke about that sense of community? Did you have a similar sense of community when you were in the school, even though you had all these multicultural factions coming in, if that makes sense?
Yeah, definitely. Really got that sense of community. And what was really nice was there were different communities that I got to be part of. So
Right.
I belong to the community of the boffins, you know, the nerds, and that was okay. But I also belong to the community of girls, which was great. Then I belong to the community of all the Black people, and then all the Black Africans. And then, you know, so there was different communities that I really felt a sense of. And I think the schools that I went to, for some reason, miraculously, there was a celebration of that. And I think it's just because growing up in the borough of Waltham Forest, it's just one of those boroughs where in everything that we do, everywhere you go, you really feel that sense of different is okay here. Different is what it means to be human. And that's very unique to how I've grown up in the borough.
Like that you celebrate. Basically, you're saying the difference was celebrated. It wasn't viewed as different is something to put you down for.
Yeah, exactly.
And so at school, that helped. What was it about school that you liked? Because you said you were in the group of the boffins. What was it about school which
Oh, I'm telling you.
Yes.
School was an escape for me.
Okay.
School, so in the 90s, I came here as an African. It wasn't cool to be African, number one. Okay. Being Caribbean was okay. Being African, no. People were still adjusting to it. And so, and being poor was a no-no. Okay. And so for me, that's where it was leveling out. Okay. Because when I went to school, my intelligence was the thing that stood before me. When I went to school, there was opportunity to learn. And actually, it was all about the effort I could put in. I could see the immediate returns. There was a fairness to it. And so for me, education, coming from an African family, education is always seen as this is the doorway to freedom. This is the doorway to progressing in life and setting up a robust future. So for me, school symbolized opportunity. It symbolized future. It symbolized future proofing and stuff. And so when I was there, it was the land of opportunity.
Yeah. So you seized it at even within your community, then you had recognized hardship, even though you recognized at the same time there was a sense of joy.
Yeah.
And you saw a way out of that, and you were encouraged that a way out of that was your education.
Exactly. Education all the way.
Yeah. And so, but there's one thing seeing that education is a way out, is another thing being able to embrace it. You embraced it. And what was it about learning which was appealing to you?
Yeah. I guess it's that thing of, for me, there's something about language. So when you come here as an immigrant or a refugee, asylum seeker, whatever you want to call it, you don't sound like everyone else. You don't speak in the same way. There's certain words or nuances that you don't quite capture. And I could see that from my parents, who think, you know, English wasn't their first language. They really struggled, whatever. And then I realized that, hey, I could do something about this. I can learn I can use big words. I could expand my vocab. You know, I could really get into it and expand my identity beyond just immigrant child who is poor, who comes from a family where they haven't been to university. For me, language and learning became, like I said, opportunity. And so there was something really beautiful, exciting, adventurous about it. And seeing actually the power you start to gain You know, there's currency in being intelligent in school. You know, you start getting upgraded. You know, teachers notice you. You get lots of opportunities. You don't get in trouble as much. So,
so tell me, when it came to, did you have role models? Who were your role models? And kind of like thinking about going through the system, the education system, because your parents would have gone through something different. Who helped you navigate that? Did you help navigating it?
I have to say, I think I lived a very independent childhood. I had to grow up really quickly. And what's really sad, and I see this, so being a counselor and being a coach, I see this in my clients who come from countries that are outside of the UK. Okay, you become adult. You become an adult very quickly, and sometimes your parents no longer hold the position of parents and the leaders in your life, because you realize that they don't have the power bases that are necessary for them to be able to be respected and honored in this society. In our own community, they've got loads of clout, you know, they're at the top of their game. But within society, when you don't speak English as your first language, when you don't have, you know, a credible, like a profession that's considered as credible, you are seen as less than. And so very quickly as a child, I realized that, oh my goodness, my parents don't have the currency or the power to be able to navigate through certain situations. So in some situations, I can't look to them, which is heartbreaking as a child. So then you start to think about, where do I go to for this type of advice and guidance that's going to allow me to navigate through society? And I didn't really have many places other than my schooling, my education, you know, books, you know, listening to teachers and what they had to say, and really building this idea of independence, which is a great thing, but is also not a great thing. But this is very much the experience of a lot of people who aren't born in this country and have had to come into this country either as immigrants or refugees or whatever. They start to learn that actually home and family doesn't always have the resources that are necessary to navigate in this society. And that's a heartbreaking reality, but it's also something that's very real.
So in terms of, so then a lot of your influences or the directions, self-motivation as to, you know, I know education is a key. You recognize the currency of being clever, being intelligent. What about then when you came to, because I appreciate all of that, but then sometimes I wonder to myself, well, with that intelligence, was there then pressure for you to say, well, get a job, go and get a decent job as soon as you possibly can? Or was it always a trajectory to say, you need to go beyond where we got to, you need to go off to university? What was it that was influenced?
Yeah, definitely university was always there. You know, it was always seen as something that was, you know, this is the next step. This is what is out there for your future. This is what opens doors. And what was beautiful was also the fact that, like I said, community. So in school, having other classmates who weren't like me, and this is where the difference becomes really important, who weren't like me, who might have come from slightly more well-off families, seeing their parents talk to them and seeing the ambition and drive and almost the knowledge about what the next step looks like, started to then inform me as well in terms of, okay, so university is important, which university, you know, which subjects, etc. So that's where community became important as well.
So community and networking. So
yes,
it
and
was like
networking.
vicariously by hearing what your friends' parents had been informing them, even though your parents may not have known how to navigate the system, you were still getting good advice from other people vicariously almost.
Exactly. So I had a best friend at the time who we're completely different classes, you know, and that's the beauty of growing up where I grew up. And her parents would take her to ballet and tap dancing and jazz and stuff. And I was like, this is amazing. I want to do that too. And my parents were like, we can't afford it, but we'll try to pay for some classes. And so I got to go on these experiences because my parents were then learning off of other parents and saying, great, what can we do with our money? Let's pull it together and make sure that Maryane could have some of this experience.
Yeah.
And so it became really important. And what it instilled in me was sometimes you don't always have the same resources as other people, but where you can create something that feels like it's enriching outside of just, you know, work, studies, whatever, it's important. And so I got to have pockets of those experiences. And then that allowed me to expand my worldview and the opportunities there.
And I suppose at the same time, it's kind of, I've tasted some of this.
Yeah.
So it gave you almost like an appetite and a desire for more.
Exactly. Curiosity.
Yeah, yeah. Fantastic. So what about then selection of university? Where did you go and what was it like? Because you talked about it being very cultural where you were in Walthamstow, East London. Where did you go to university? What was it?
Yeah, so I applied to study English language and literature. Why? Because English was the second language for me. And I was like, I'm going to master this language. Okay, I'm going to get this right. I'm going to make sure I've got proof. So that was one of the motivators. And so I applied to Oxford, I applied to King's and UCL as well. And Oxford was at the top of my list. And that was only because like there was a whole thing of Marianne's really intelligent. We're going to get her on the Oxford summer schemes and stuff like that. And all this stuff. And everyone was like, Oxford. But when I did the summer schemes, I would come back so depressed because I was like, this environment does not look like Walthamstow. I don't see anyone that looks like me. It's very different. And I felt very quickly a sense of isolation. And I knew that there was a sense of, there's something about it back then that it wasn't ready for me. It wasn't ready for people like me. And actually being so young, I didn't know that I wanted to have to go through that journey. So I applied, but I don't think I had that much motivation towards it. I didn't get in. The relief I had, and yet the despair that my parents had, we had such different reactions. I was like, yeah. And they were like, oh my gosh, you know. And then I remember walking into King's and I was like, I'm home. It's in the, you know, it was a Strand campus, middle of central London. And it was amazing. I just felt at home. And it was great because it's prestigious university, but it's in London. You know, it still feels like home. And there's still some difference. But what was interesting is studying English language and literature, which then became, I then transferred to English language, literature and film, as the only Black person, or actually one of two Black people in the class. That was a different experience. I was like, this is not like Walthamstow. And there are serious levels to class that I didn't even know existed.
Yeah. Okay. So how coming back to the idea of your sense of identity, sense of belonging, having come from somewhere which was quite multicultural, inclusive.
Yeah.
A situation where lack of diversity. What was inclusion like in those spaces?
Oh, it was difficult. It was completely difficult. You know, I'm sitting down in the class and we're talking about whether it's Shakespeare or we're looking at sort of like World War poetry or whatever. And then you have those moments of small talk. Hey, so how was your weekend? What did you get up to? That sort of thing. And very quickly, I realized that my weekends was not the same as everyone else's. People would talk about their horses and doing horse riding. People were talking about going in search for the first edition of Jane Austen's blah, 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 blah. Or they take a quick trip to Paris. I was like, my weekend was in Walthamstow, quickly going to Walthamstow, buying a few things and buying some hair products for my braids. I was like, this is not the same world at all. And I would be like really excited about student loans just come in. And everyone's like, student loan? What is that? So very quickly, I realized that, okay, in this space, it's a different space. In this space, I've got to probably show up as a different Maryane. I've got to tap into a different side of me because this space can't hold the fullness of my diversity. It's not like Walthamstow. Yeah. And so very quickly at the age of 19 or 20, I realized that I needed to adopt different parts of my identity, dialing up some bits and dialing down some bits, you know, the whole code switching and all this stuff. Yeah. You know, these heavy burdens that we carry as people of color very early on. I started learning that very quickly. So,
but how did you? So, apart from those code switching that you had to do, how else did you cope? Because
I took a bus and a train, and I went all the way to Guy's campus in London Bridge so that I could find all the Black and Asian and people of color who were studying medicine. because no one of color was studying English language and literature. So that's what I did. I went to find my community, and I remember there was a party that was happening at one of the campus bars, and I walked in and I went to a whole group of people of color, and I just said, "Hey there, I need some friends who understand my journey and my story, and you people look like you'll understand me. We need to be friends." And they were just like, "Yeah, sure."
I like that introductions. I need, you know.
It was a desperation. I was like, I don't care if I embarrass myself, it's fine.
So on the course, clearly you enjoyed did you enjoy the course?
Yeah.
Yeah.
It was lovely.
Yeah. So it didn't matter that you were one of only two. You still made sure that you embraced what you came.
Yeah. I enjoyed the course in terms of the purpose it served to stretch my ability to communicate and use language and words and to use it to wield power. Okay. I enjoyed the course in terms of what it was cultivating in my understanding. I didn't enjoy the experience and the community that I was in, because that community did not speak my language. That community did not seek to bring me into it. And so very much it was me coming in, taking what I needed to take, and then exiting. Right. And not even being noticed. Yeah. And so that was not an environment that felt comfortable, but the learning and the opportunity was right.
That's really interesting, in that from what you've said, you sought out your community and then you took from the environment, as it were, and that's what I'm going to call it. Yeah. From the environment, what you felt you needed, because that environment wasn't actually bringing you in for inclusion. Exactly.
And that's really sad, because we know within the workplace, that's the experience of many people of color within the workplace. You come in with the promise of an amazing job, an amazing environment, and all these great employee benefits. And you get in there and you don't see people who are like you, or people who are willing to understand people who are like you. And so very quickly, you start to figure out, well, why am I here? What do I take out of this? And what do I just realize that I need to bow out of? And that's a very sad experience and reality of what it's like for people of color in the workplace. Yeah. So I was learning early on, the tools of survival. Yeah. Instead of the tools of thriving, it was the tools of surviving. That's.
So where did you go from there? Having completed your degree and
completed a degree, went and worked. So I was really excited about education, always have been, and what it opens up. When I was a student, I worked with a student marketing team, and so I understood sort of, that university world education. So I went and worked for a private school in High Street, Kensington, loved that. I was a student liaison officer and PA to Director of Studies. Then I decided that, I don't want to work for a private school. I want to be in a university. So I did a short stint at University of East London for about 6 months. And I was like, not my environment. I need a different university. And then I ended up at the London School of Economics at the age of 25 or something. And I was like, I have found my place. I have found the environment where I am going to bed down and grow and be cultivated. And I was there for about 11 years, actually.
So what was it about the London School of Economics, which, because some people would think, oh, that's kind of like one of those institutions. Yeah. But here, it's kind of like thinking about what we talked about, the environment before, compared to here, where you've now said, I can thrive here. So what was the difference?
One, there's clout and prestige. You need to be in the right environment that is going to open opportunities for you. And you need to be comfortable being around power. So one thing I learned when I was young, what my parents would do, they go, right, kids, we are going to go to central London and we're going to go to Harrods, or we're going to go to somewhere fancy that we can't afford to be in. We're going to walk around and we might just grab a light bite or a little coffee that we can afford, because we need you children to get used to being in environments where the power base is stronger than you, where you don't feel you belong, but you find ways of belonging and finding ways of creating a narrative around that. So very early on, I got used to being in places where I didn't belong, but I knew what I could take from it. And so for me, the London School of Economics, prestigious university, global ranking, I needed to be there because I deserve to be there. But then I realized that it was going to be an uphill struggle and it's going to be very different. But there was an excitement in learning how to navigate through that. And so there was that excitement to start with. It was great. And then it became harder.
You want to expand on how it's up to you if you want to.
Simple things. I was just a bright, excited 25-year-old. And I remember I came into a role, it was a program administrator role. And then after less than a year, I was like, I want to become a program manager because I know I've got the skills and the expertise to do that. And very quickly, I had people letting me know that I didn't deserve that. But why? But why don't I deserve? They won't tell me, but you need to know that actually the face doesn't fit, And I remember going for interview and I had to do 3 rounds of interview for a really junior role.
Yeah.
And then the manager at the time wanted to then add a psychometric assessment to it for a really basic role, all because the idea is the face didn't fit. And then eventually I did get the role, but it wasn't given to me joyously. It was very much you have been given this, and so you need to work for this now. And so very early on, it was like, oh, okay, so it's okay if you're junior, but the minute you have the audacity to want to climb the ranks before permission is given, you'll be told about it. And so very early on, I started recognizing, okay, there's a place I can occupy. Outside of that, I'm being audacious.
So it was again that period of about that inclusion, the same experience when you were in the class of English, your English class, that there was, you're here, we'll allow you to be, almost like we'll allow you to be here, but we're not going to necessarily make you feel included within.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly. And when you are so young and you're the only one, it's a hard experience, because in that moment you can choose to assimilate and literally find ways of making your true self invisible, or you can find ways of paving through. Once again, going back to community, what was really beautiful at the London School of Economics was there were certain people who chose to be my sponsors. I remember there was a very senior lady called Dina, amazing individual. She was from the US, Italian American. And she would always see me and she'd see opportunities for me to step into places where I was super junior, but she would put me in places where there were senior people, because she wanted to teach me that, Maryane, learn to belong. Find your voice, find your power bases. And she was amazing. She opened up so many doors for me, and I'm so forever grateful for her. And I had academics who were also championing me and sort of being there because they could see what I could bring to the table. So there's always people that have power, who own it, who are familiar with it, that if you can spot them and if you build somehow, I don't know, I didn't do anything, but somehow they saw me and they became sponsors. And that's what helped my career at LSE. And then it started giving me a sense of belonging. And then I started thinking, but who are my role models? Who are the people that look like me here at LSE that I can look up to? And I really didn't have any. I didn't. And I remember it was probably 5 years into LSE, I started noticing more Black and Asian people coming into the community. And they would then start telling me that I was the person they would look up to. And I was like, oh, but I don't have someone to look up to. And then I realized, okay, if people are looking up to me, my job then is to start creating opportunities for more people to feel a sense of belonging. And then that's when I started going into like the EDI positions and the supporting staff networks as well around race and equity. So yeah, I started then creating a sense of belonging and finding other people who are like me.
So when you got to that position, I really like this. When you got to that position where you could then influence and create opportunities, that's what you did.
Yeah.
And I know our previous, before how I came to know you was through the staff networks, the Lucky Network, which you set up, which is a collaboration between King's, LSE, UCL, and Imperial. And you, from my perspective, you were the spearhead, right? I'm not joking. You had the energy, the focus for others to see, and so I can understand your position there. So what were you hoping to achieve in undertaking these roles? And then we'll go on to what you're doing now.
Yeah, so yeah, I became the chair of LSE Embrace, which was a staff network that sort of championed race equity, and then I sat on the EDI advisory board and various other committees. And my thing initially, it was just, I need to find people who are like me in this institution. I've been here for a long time, and I realized that I don't have my people. So that was one of the sort of driving incentives to start with. And then slowly I was like, oh my goodness, not everyone has had a sponsor. Not everyone has been championed in the way that I've been championed. And as much as I thought I had struggles, my struggles didn't come anywhere close to some of the struggles I was noticing from other staff members, whether it was academic staff or professional services staff. So there's that sense of justice where I was like, no, this can't be. And so then I was motivated to think about, well, how do we start creating an environment and a community that really felt like, at the time it was, LSE is one, like Imperial is one, but this idea of the community coming together, and in our differences, that's where the belonging happens. So that became the motivator, really. And I have to give credit to LSE leadership at the time, especially Dame Manoush, who she championed this. She found opportunities to create space for staff to voice what they wanted, and she then really created this idea of sponsorship at the senior level. So it was amazing to be at the institution at the time, driving change and feeling that there was this real authentic desire for equity. And I use equity specifically because equality isn't actually what we need equity. And so that was really beautiful, seeing that in action and seeing more people of color at all levels, from the cleaning staff to security staff to professional services, academic, all coming together and saying, this is what we need. This is a change we want to see. We need to be visible. And also feeling that we are the community, not it coming into the community. We are the community.
Yeah, that's beautiful. What would you say would be based on that, what would you say you look back at that time and think, yes, I'm really proud of this. Is there a particular initiative or anything like that?
Oh, I think the pandemic, the murder of George Floyd, that's when everyone wanted to listen about race. And I think in that time, creating community, when we were seeing our community visibly being depleted because of COVID, and really creating this strength of voice. And so definitely having creating allies, which was amazing. Creating workshops on white privilege and white fragility, and getting senior members of staff and junior members of staff come together and saying, actually, we do need to talk about this. We need to recognize our privilege. And it was amazing to see that willingness to do that. Also looking at opportunities to work really closely with HR and looking at the recruitment, the retention, the promotion aspects of all our policies, and starting to create some real tangible change and conversations around that. And then looking at our recruitment panels and making sure that we could get people of color on the panels to make sure that candidates of people of color, when they came in, it wasn't just an all-white panel, but there was some diversity there, and we would avoid groupthink. And so this wasn't done just by myself. This was done as part of the LSE Embrace community, and then the senior leadership that came alongside us to be able to achieve that. So it was beautiful seeing community coming together to then shape the overall community. I'm saying all of this as if it was all roses and everyone came together, we were all holding hands. The reality is, we know there are some people who are going to throw roadblocks at you. There's always going to be something about, we need more data, or the methodology just doesn't sit right. You need to start again. That was there. There was lots of, barriers. But it was beautiful to see the collective effort. And also during my time at Embrace, what I loved about the way I worked was bringing together the other staff networks. So the women networks, the LGBTQ plus networks, the disability networks, the parents and carers networks, and actually recognizing people of color, Black people exist in all those categories.
That's right.
So we have to work collectively as well. So that I really enjoyed creating communities within communities and bringing different communities together as well.
We're coming back to that communities.
Yeah.
It's a common theme that is threaded throughout the that we've had. Kind of like moving on, because I know you came to Imperial and you worked at Imperial for a while.
Yeah.
Yeah. But aside from also working here, I know that you've got other interests as well. Can
Oh,
you
yes.
expand upon some of those things and
Oh, yes.
now?
So I like variety. I've always liked varieties because I like culture. So I've had a portfolio career. So at the time at LSE, I was head of career services and alumni relations and corporate relations, employer engagement. So that whole careers and alumni relations part was always part of my identity, and I loved it. I've cultivated it. Coming into Imperial, I held the position of head of alumni relations for the business school. And so that was great. That was an expression of who I am and how I engage. But in the backdrops for all of that, I've been training and studying. I've done multiple masters and all sorts of degrees in the area of organizational development and also counseling and coaching. So my real passion is around people and how we engage with people, how we engage with their present self here, how we engage with their past self and the narratives and the stories that have shaped their present self, and then how we support them in creating a narrative for the future that they're envisaging. And all of that's been cultivated by the work that I do, working in community, loving education. And now it's just poured into helping people to have a sense of self-education and having a sense of what does it mean to belong? What is the relationship I hold with myself? And what's the relationship I hold with others, and how do other people experience me? And so working as a counselor and as a coach, bringing those two disciplines together is so enriching, because we realize that people are just busy. We're all just busy living and doing, that we don't take the time to sit down and think to ourselves, what is my narrative? How did I arrive here? What are the scripts and the things that are blocking me from progressing? And how do I move forward? So yeah, that's my passion, and that's what I do. You know, I've had the courage to step outside of higher education and establish my business, and it's been great.
So I love that entrepreneurial, that curiosity spirit which you're displaying and you're doing. It's not, there's certain times someone said to me last week, it's not just about active listening, it's about doing. And that's what you're doing. You've listened, you've thought, and you've gone out and done. So going forward in this coaching sphere, what is it that you're hoping to kind of like bring to your clientele? What is it that you're hoping to enable them to achieve through their interactions with you?
Yeah. Well, it's allowing people to really get a sense of clarity about their story. There's something about narratives, okay? We all have a story, and there's sub-stories to the main story. So for me, it's supporting clients, whether I'm working with a senior executive, whether I'm working with a couple, whether I'm working with someone who's very early in their sort of career. It's around actually understanding, how did you get here? What have been the things that have propelled you forward? What have been the things that are pulling you back? How do you free yourself from those things? And then how do you then move forward? So it's really supporting people in building a authentic relationship with themselves. So you've got to know yourself to have a relationship with yourself, and then to build a authentic relationship with others as well. So that's essentially the work I do. And it doesn't matter if we are talking about senior individuals or we're talking about people who are very early in their lives, or whether they're couples. That is always what I'm doing with people.
Fantastic. I'm just wary of time. But we have almost exhausted our time. So I'm going to just ask two more questions.
Yeah.
And I'm going to just ask the question about looking back over all of your experiences, right? What advice would you have given to your younger self? I normally say 16, but I'm gonna say the 18-year-old going off to university, or one of them. What to them?
My advice would be even more curious and be even more adventurous. That would be my advice.
Okay. Yeah? And that 16-year-old self or younger self of yours, what would they look at you and say, wow, Maryane, you did that? What do you think that they would say?
they'd say you've been badass with your education. You've smashed it with your distinctions and your many master's degrees. They would say you have enjoyed your life fully. Like, I'm married to an amazing husband who's just great, and we have such a great adventure together. They would love the fact that I live my life fully, regardless of the obstacles. I'm always leaning into what are my values and how does this align to who I am? And that's what they would look at, and they'd say, I love your courage. I love your curiosity. I love your adventure.
I love that. Maryane, you've been absolutely brilliant. Your story is fascinating, and I know we're going to work together again in the future.
Yeah.
Soon, all right. I might come and sit on your counseling coach, your counseling couch, right, and get some more hints and tips as
Yeah.
putting that. I love the what you were saying about the looking at the past narrative, looking at the present situation, and then articulating what is it that you want for your future self. I think that's a beautiful metaphor of what we need to be doing.
Yeah. And that's what this whole belonging thing is, isn't it? You know, understanding our lived experiences, how it shaped us, and what does that mean for the future?
Exactly. As Marcus Garvey says, a man who doesn't have an idea of his past is like a tree without roots, without foundation. And what happens to trees without foundations? They fall over. So we find our foundations. Yeah. And I'm glad that you're helping so many people actually find their foundations.
Oh, so well put.
No, you're the linguist here. You're the one who mastered the language. Right. But Maryane, it's been absolutely brilliant having you as our guest this week. I'm just going to share with everyone what's going to be happening next week, or not next week, the week after. So if I just pull this up. So our next guest will be in 2 weeks' time, not next week, not the 21st, which would be the usual. On the 28th, we're going to have Jade Dunn, and she's a career coach. So we've got that coaching theme going on, but a career coach with a fertility lens. So it's a really fascinating, or she is a really fascinating individual. So come along and hear how she's helping people to embrace and balance the fertility challenges with their careers. If you haven't, this week, on Wednesday, or next week, I should say, next Thursday, please come along to hear Linda Ince Greenaway. You may have heard her on Belonging a few months ago, but she's going to be here in person, sharing her experiences of hard truth, growing out of adversity. It's going to be absolutely riveting. So please come and join us at our Meet the Author event. If you have missed any of the previous Belongings, then please go to our YouTube channel, which is tinyurl.com belonging-IAO. So it's been wonderful having you, and it's been great for those who have joined us or who are listening in. But remember, it's really important that you find some way of gaining that sense of identity, sense of belonging. Find your tribe, develop your community, because I think it's so vitally important for all of us to have that each week. So until we meet again in a couple of weeks' time, enjoy the summer, and I will see you again very soon. Take care.